Earlier this week, tech giant Google suffered a major legal blow. A federal judge ruling that the company has violated U.S. antitrust laws and has held an illegal monopoly on search providers. Joining us now with more on this historic ruling is Anjana Susarla. Thank you for being here, professor with responsible AI at Michigan State University.
Thank you for having me.
So this is one that we've been pretty much keeping a close eye on. Of course, Google is just a mecca of searching online for so many people, and it's been synonymous with the thought of online searches. What does this ruling mean, and what are your thoughts on what we're hearing?
This is a very significant victory for the government because Google has a kind of dominance in, I would say, the informational ecosystem that sort of we all live in. We don't realize how much we sort of depend on Google. We're using our phone, we are searching for something, and you could be using an Apple phone, but there is almost like a default. Google and Apple have an arrangement. So Google still is the backbone of a lot of internet searches. That means Google also has this enormous power in how it indexes web pages, how it sort of maintains, I would say this whole, the way that web searches are monetized, the digital advertising ecosystem. So moving forward, what does this mean? I think one of the key things in this settlement is that they ruled that because Google has this kind of a default position, that is violating antitrust. That's an anti-competitive move. So Google and Apple actually have an agreement. I think that's supposed to be renewed in 2026. So the question then is, what are the remedies? After this ruling, what happens next? Will the judge actually say that there has to be some accommodation for the way that we use our phones, how we search for information using our phones? Does this mean that Google will no longer be the default search? There are all kinds of interesting questions. Moving beyond, I think the amount of informational advantage that Google has also gives it a lot of unparalleled visibility into what we really, what people are looking at, what people want. And so that might also mean in future they have enormous information that they can use to train these powerful AI models, whether it's Google has a model called Gemini that's a rival to OpenAI. So all these things are, moving forward, we have to ask what is at stake for us as consumers.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't really give it much thought. We're just so used to the convenience of it, but you're right, they're able to track your location, what you're searching for, where you're going, even if you're traveling around the world, tracking all that information. How dangerous could it be to have one company having a grip on so much information about us?
But so far, I think the question still has been more about monopoly power. I think maybe we as consumers, we've gotten used to this convenience. So if Google is no longer our default search engine, can some other company really unseat Google's dominance? That may be very challenging because this is I would say, very capital intensive, it's very expensive business to maintain. And only because Google has that dominant position, they are able to kind of monetize all the data they have about us. Because we as consumers, we are not paying for search. This is what's called a two-sided market, where Google is monetizing the information it has about us, and kind of, they are able to get the money from the advertisers. Can someone break up this dominance? We don't know, but I think this ruling may make it possible that some alternatives will emerge.
Yeah, and we know that there are other search engines out there, DuckDuckGo, Yahoo, Bing, to name a few, but they're just not as popular. So moving forward, what could this look like?
It's hard to speculate, but it may be that consumers are no longer, when we are using our iPhones, for example, does that mean that Google will no longer be a default search engine and that we are actually presented with more choices? Because this was the key argument that the Department of Justice, that the government was able to bring in the antitrust case. They were able to argue that the fact that we are just almost hardwired, consumer psychology dictates that if something is the default option, we are not going to look for any alternatives. So would this mean moving forward that Google will no longer be our default search engine in multiple platforms? The immediate, I think, important thing to watch will be what happens to the arrangement between Apple and Google. Will Apple try to invest in its own search engine? And for smaller search engines like, I would say, Firefox, this may not necessarily be such a great thing because they at least, I think, removing this Google interface is not necessarily going to help them. So there's all sorts of interesting consumer side implications that will emerge from, may not happen in the immediate, next like few months or 1 year, because I don't really see anyone challenging the dominance of Google. It just is so powerful. They have such a, I would say, they've been so great at understanding all this data and delivering these targeted ads. They understand how consumers are behaving, not just across the world, but even if when we are not online, when we go and shop in a physical store, the digital ad ecosystem is powerful enough that they can integrate that offline data with the online data. And so this kind of unparalleled visibility into all of us, what happens to that? I think that's a very interesting question for marketers, for professors like me, for consumer experts.
Yeah, it is. They've been at the top for a long time. We will be watching it. Anjana, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.